Hello, dear listeners. Today, we delve into a story that explores the delicate and often painful complexities of familial relationships. This narrative contains themes of betrayal, loss, and inappropriate behavior, but it is told with sensitivity and care. If you are ready to embark on this journey, please remember that the power of stories lies in their ability to foster empathy and understanding. Let us begin. How could I have known that moment would change my life completely? It was just an ordinary day until I walked into that room. The door was slightly open, and something inside me shifted. Within seconds, I could have turned back, ignored it, but I didn't. Because in that moment, when I realized what I was looking at, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. And yes, I was the one at fault here. I was the one who started it, and the one who didn't stop it. Joni was at work, and the house was quiet. But I heard faint noises coming from upstairs. My stepson Lakey was in his room. At first, I didn't think much of it. Just another moment of a young man lost in his own world. But maybe he'd like a coffee. A little conversation might be nice. As I walked up the stairs, I tried to figure out where the sounds were coming from. When I got closer to his room, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I took a breath, about to call out to him. But then my eyes landed on Lakey. He was sitting on his bed, his tablet propped up on his lap, the bright screen casting a glow on his face. His hands were moving, and at first, I thought he was just watching something exciting, maybe an action movie. But as I took one more step, changing my angle, I felt my blood drain from my face. That was the moment I realized exactly what Lakey was doing. My eyes caught the reflection on the screen, and a cold wave washed over me. I hadn't expected this. I hadn't wanted to see this. Lakey scrambled, trying to compose himself, frantically lowering the volume on his tablet. But it was too late. The moment had already happened. When our eyes met, his face turned bright red, the shame in his eyes undeniable. I'm sorry, he stammered, looking away. I felt frozen in place. The door. I started, but I had no idea what I was even trying to say. A strange warmth spread through me. I was embarrassed, yes, but my mind was also racing with thoughts I couldn't quite grasp. I quickly stepped out of the room, my heart pounding against my chest. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to steady my breath. What the hell was that? I whispered to myself. What had I just done? Why had I been so careless? But was I the only one at fault here? That night I couldn't sleep. I kept tossing and turning in bed, but the restlessness inside me wouldn't let me be. There was only one thing on my mind. Lakey, this couldn't go on. I needed to set a boundary. If he had feelings for me, I had to say it outright and put a stop to it. With that thought, I got out of bed. My heart was pounding like crazy, but my feet had already taken me to Lakey's room. His door was slightly open, and the dim light inside faintly illuminated the room. As I stepped inside, I saw him. He was sleeping, but at that moment my eyes weren't on him. They were fixed on something else. Something big. My breath caught. My body froze for a moment. Seeing him like that sent a storm raging inside me. I shouldn't have seen it. I should have turned around immediately. But I didn't. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to understand what I was feeling. Then I quietly pulled back. There was something inside me that I couldn't suppress, but I had to ignore it. I returned to my room, lay down, but nothing was the same anymore. That night, I had no idea how much more complicated things would become. The next day, Lakey came home late. He was drunk. The noise from the door, the things he knocked over, the sounds could have woken the neighbors. I quickly stepped out of my room and went to him. Lakey, are you okay? I asked, my voice low but firm. He looked at me, his eyes slightly unfocused. Jessica, you're real, he mumbled. His words slurred from the alcohol. I took a deep breath and grabbed his arm. Come on, you can't go upstairs like this. We have to be quiet. But Lakey's eyes were locked onto my face. He smiled softly, his gaze slowly traveling over me. You know, you're really beautiful. Have you always been this way, or did I just never notice? I froze for a second, but then quickly pulled myself together. Lakey, that's enough. Come to the kitchen. I'll make you some coffee. I slowly led him to the kitchen, trying to sober him up a little. But because of Lakey's gaze and the things he was saying, Something inside me was also unraveling. Lakey sat down on the chair while I prepared the coffee. But suddenly, the cup slipped from his hands and spilled onto the counter. "Ah, Lakey, you need to be more careful," I whispered, quickly trying to clean up the mess. But Lakey just smiled softly. "Were you always this sweet?" I hurriedly cleaned up the kitchen. We couldn't stay here any longer. My ex-husband was sleeping upstairs, but with Lakey in this state, he couldn't afford to make any more noise. "All right, we're going upstairs, but be quiet," I warned, slipping my arm around his and guiding him toward the stairs. When we got to his room, his movements were even more unsteady. He needed to change his clothes, but he was too out of it to do it on his own. At first, I wanted to turn around, but when I saw him struggling to take off his shirt, I instinctively helped him. As my fingers reached for the buttons of his shirt, Lakey's breathing slowed. At that moment, the tension between us filled the air. The silence only made it more intense that I knew exactly what I was doing, yet at the same time, I had no idea. Lakey was looking at me differently, and this was one of those moments. One of the moments we could never take back. Lakey hesitated while changing his clothes. He let his hands fall to his sides and locked eyes with me. That was when I realized my breathing had quickened. It was so quiet. The air in the room felt heavy, making it difficult to even breathe. "I'm not playing this game anymore, Jessica," he said, his voice soft at first but filled with certainty. I stared at him without blinking, my heart pounding. "What are you? We both caught each other once, and that's it. You don't think about it at all? I know it crosses your mind before you sleep," he added, his voice deepening slightly. A shiver ran through me, making me take a small step back. But my feet felt glued to the floor. "Lakey, this isn't right," I said, but my voice trembled. Lakey smiled slightly, but it wasn't an innocent smile. "We passed the point of deciding what's right a long time ago, Jessica. Stop lying to yourself." Then he took a step forward, and another. He was so close now that I could feel his breath against my skin. He reached up, his fingers trailing gently over my cheek, that I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew he was right. This is just the beginning of the story. If you'd like me to continue, let me know, and I'll expand it further, exploring the emotional and physical complexities of their relationship in a way that's both beautiful and veiled. Lakey's fingers lingered on my cheek, his touch sending a shiver down my spine. I could feel the heat of his body, the way his breath hitched as he leaned closer. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "Jessica," he whispered, his voice low and trembling. "You can't tell me you don't feel this too." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. He was right, I did feel it. The pull between us had been growing for weeks, maybe even months. But admitting it out loud felt like crossing a line I could never return from. "Lakey, this is..." I started, but he cut me off, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss so soft it was almost hesitant. For a moment, I froze, unsure of how to respond. But then something inside me broke loose, and I kissed him back. It was a kiss filled with all the tension, all the unspoken words, all the forbidden desire that had been building between us. His hands slid to my waist, pulling me closer, and I let him. The warmth of his body against mine was intoxicating, and I couldn't think straight. All I knew was that I didn't want this moment to end. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathless. Lakey's eyes searched mine, looking for some kind of confirmation, some sign that I felt the same way he did. "Jessica," he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me this isn't wrong." I didn't know what to say. All I could do was nod, my hands trembling as I reached up to touch his face. After that first kiss, things between us changed. We didn't talk about it, not really, but there was an unspoken agreement, a silent understanding that whatever was happening between us was real. And it wasn't going away. That we started spending more time together, stealing moments whenever we could. A brush of hands in the kitchen, a lingering glance across the room, a quiet conversation late at night when the rest of the house was asleep. That it was dangerous, and I knew it, but I couldn't stop myself. Every time I was near him, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. One evening, we were sitting on the couch, watching a movie, or at least pretending to watch a movie. Lakey's arm was draped over the back of the couch, his fingers lightly tracing patterns on my shoulder, that I tried to focus on the screen, but my mind was elsewhere. Every touch, every breath, every movement felt amplified, as if the entire world had narrowed down to just the two of us. "Jessica," Lakey said softly, his voice breaking the silence that I turned to look at him, and our eyes met. There was something in his gaze, something intense and unspoken, that made my heart skip a beat. Without a word he leaned in, his lips capturing mine in a kiss that was anything but hesitant this time. It was deep, passionate, and filled with all the emotions we had been holding back that I melted into him, my hands tangling in his hair as the kiss deepened. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathless. Lakey rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed as he tried to steady his breathing. "Jessica," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "I don't know what this is, but I can't stop it." Neither could I. The tension between us reached a breaking point one stormy night. The power had gone out, leaving the house bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. Lakey and I were sitting in the living room, the flickering flames casting shadows on the walls that we were talking about nothing and everything, when the conversation turned to us. "Jessica," Lakey said, his voice quiet but firm. "I need to know, do you feel this too? Or am I just imagining it?" I looked at him, my heart aching at the vulnerability in his eyes. "Lakey, I didn't know how to finish that sentence. How could I explain the storm of emotions raging inside me? How could I put into words the way he made me feel, alive, desired, and terrified all at once?" Instead of answering, I reached out and took his hand, lacing our fingers together. His breath hitched, and he leaned closer, his eyes searching mine. "Jessica," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I need you." Those 3 words shattered whatever resolve I had left. I leaned in, capturing his lips in a kiss that was filled with all the longing, all the desire, all the forbidden love that had been building between us. The kiss deepened, and before I knew it, we were lying on the couch, our bodies pressed together as the storm raged outside. His hands roamed over my body, leaving trails of fire in their wake, and I let myself get lost in the moment that it was wrong. I knew it was wrong, but in that moment I didn't care. All I cared about was him. The next morning, I woke up alone in my bed, the events of the previous night playing on a loop in my mind. My body still tingled from his touch, but my heart was heavy with guilt. What had I done? I got up and went to the kitchen, where Lakey was already sitting at the table, a cup of coffee in his hands. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes filled with a mix of emotions, desire, guilt, and something else I couldn't quite place. "Jessica," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence that I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and sat down across from him, my hands trembling as I reached for the coffee pot. That we sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, the weight of what had happened hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Lakey spoke. "Jessica, he hesitated, his voice trailing off. "I don't regret it, but I need to know, do you?" I looked at him, my heart aching at the vulnerability in his eyes. "Lakey, I don't know what this is, but I do know that I can't stop it." He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "Then let's not stop it." The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments and quiet desperation. Lakey and I moved around each other like magnets, drawn together by an invisible force neither of us could resist. The house, once a place of mundane routine, now felt charged with electricity, every glance and touch a reminder of the line we had crossed. But the guilt was relentless. It gnawed at me in the quiet hours of the night, when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment in my mind. I told myself it was just a phase, a fleeting lapse in judgment. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Lakey had awakened something in me, a part of myself I had buried long ago. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the house in a golden glow, Lakey found me in the garden. I was pruning the roses, my hands trembling slightly as I worked. He stood there for a moment watching me, before stepping closer. "Jessica," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We need to talk." I set the shears down and turned to face him, my heart pounding. His eyes were serious, his jaw set in a way that made my stomach twist. "About last night," he began, his voice trailing off as he searched for the right words. I know this is complicated. I know it's wrong. But I can't pretend anymore. I can't keep hiding how I feel. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Lakey, we can't. Why not? He interrupted, his voice rising slightly. Why can't we? Because of what people will think. Because of some arbitrary rules? Jessica, I've never felt this way about anyone before. And I know you feel it too. His words hit me like a punch to the chest. He was right, I did feel it. But admitting it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff, with no guarantee of what lay below. Lakey, I whispered, my voice breaking. This isn't just about us. There's Joni, your father, the life we've built. If we do this, if we keep going down this path, there's no turning back. He stepped closer, his eyes burning with intensity. Maybe I don't want to turn back. Maybe I want to see where this leads. I wanted to argue, to tell him all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. But as I looked into his eyes, all my objections melted away. In that moment, all I could think about was the way his lips felt against mine, the way his touch set my skin on fire. And then, as if he could read my thoughts, he kissed me. It was a kiss filled with all the longing and desperation we had been holding back. A kiss that left no room for doubt or hesitation. I kissed him back, my hands tangling in his hair as I pulled him closer. But as the kiss deepened, a sudden noise shattered the moment. We broke apart, our breaths coming in ragged gasps, and turned to see Joni standing in the doorway, her face pale with shock. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. None of us moved, none of us spoke. Then, without a word, Joni turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the silence. My heart sank. Lakey, I whispered, my voice trembling. What have we done? He reached for my hand, his grip firm. We'll figure it out, he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. Together. But I wasn't so sure. The look on Joni's face had been one of betrayal. And I knew there was no coming back from this. The life we had built, the fragile peace we had maintained, was crumbling around us. That night, Joni didn't come home. I sat by the phone, waiting for her to call, but the hours passed in silence. Lakey stayed with me, his presence a small comfort in the midst of the storm. But even as we sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of the end. The next morning, Joni returned. She walked into the house with a suitcase in hand, her face set in a mask of determination. Joni, I began, my voice trembling. Please let me explain. She shook her head, her eyes cold. There's nothing to explain, Jessica. I saw everything I needed to see. I felt a lump rise in my throat. Joni, I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. But you did, she said, her voice breaking. You both did. Lakey stepped forward, his face pale. Mom, don't, she interrupted, holding up a hand. Just don't. She turned and walked out the door, leaving us standing there in stunned silence. The weight of what we had done settled over us like a heavy blanket, suffocating and inescapable. In the days that followed, the house felt emptier than ever. Joni filed for divorce, and Lakey and I were left to pick up the pieces of our shattered lives. We tried to move forward, to find some semblance of normalcy, but the guilt and shame were always there, lurking in the shadows. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lakey turned to me, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. Jessica, he said softly, I think we need to let go. I felt a pang in my chest. What do you mean? I mean this. Us. It's destroying us. And I can't keep living like this, knowing what we've done. Tears welled up in my eyes. Lakey, I love you, he interrupted, his voice breaking. But sometimes love isn't enough. I reached for his hand, my heart aching. I love you too. But you're right. It's not sustainable. We sat there for a long time, holding hands as the sun dipped below the horizon. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes, the hardest thing to do is to let go of the things we want the most. In the end, Lakey moved away, leaving me to rebuild my life on my own. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the guilt threatened to consume me. But over time, I learned to forgive myself, to find peace in the choices I had made. And though I never forgot Lakey, I knew that letting him go was the only way we could both find happiness. It was a painful lesson, but one that taught me the true cost of love, and the strength it takes to walk away. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the complexities of desire, morality, and self-discovery. Sarah's story is a testament to the power of human connection and the importance of staying true to oneself. If you enjoyed this story and want to explore more tales of passion and intrigue, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss an episode, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your support and feedback are what make this adventure possible.